Hi and welcome to episode 1 of the series Racism in the UK. In this podcast we want to explore different dimensions of racism, especially focusing on the United Kingdom. Your hosts for today are
Paulina,
Thomas,
Emilia,
and me, Lily.
So recently, the singer Leigh-Anne, one of the members of the British band Little Mix, published a documentary about her experience as the only black member of her band. In the film called Race, Pop and Power, she speaks to other people, including fellow musicians, about racism in the music industry. This inspired us to make today's episode about just that, racism in the pop industry. We are especially going to focus on how the skin color influences the success of musicians, how their image is shaped by stereotypes, colorism, the phenomenon of white passing, and what role we play in this context.
you probably all know Leigh-Anne. She's been a member of the award-winning girl band Little Mix and already has an impressive resume. She herself grew up in the UK, but both of her parents are immigrants. Her mother is half Bayesian and her father is half Jamaican, and both of them identify as black. Leigh-Anne also identifies as black since they raised her accordingly. She always listened to black music, ate West Indian food, etc.
but most of her life, being black was something that she was proud of. Racism was not anything she experienced in her daily life. But after several years in the music industry, she started to become more aware of the structural racism that people of color have to face, as well as the different facets of it. But this awareness only came with some time. In the beginning, Leigh-Anne simply felt a little off.
Sometimes, I felt I was being treated differently to my bandmates because of the colour of my skin.
An example for this would be the treatment of the fans. Leigh-Anne remembers that once when Little Mix arrived at the airport, some fans were waiting for them. But although she was the first who came out of the plane, they just walked past her to the other girls. That must be a horrible feeling. Moreover, when fans were asked which girl of the band they liked most, Jessie, Perry and Jade, the other band members,
Who are white, by the way.
were named often, while Leigh-Anne was barely mentioned.
I mean, she states that the racism she faced was rather in the form of small things. She never experienced direct racism in form of insults, for example, but all those little moments certainly hurt. Leigh-Anne describes it as feeling invisible.
Why do I feel like invisible? And for so long, people would say to me, it's in your head.
I think it's common to experience racism in subtle ways. You often don't recognize it in the moment. But the sum of all these little moments lead to feeling excluded. And when you reflect and think about it, you may see a bigger picture.
Probably that's also why it took her so long to become aware of the racism she was facing the whole time.
During that time she kept questioning herself, wondering whether it is her color or whether it is just in her head. As she never felt good enough, she constantly tried to improve.
And all that matters is that feeling, and that feeling that just doesn't go away. Like, it keeps hurting and hurting. And wondering, is it my colour? Like, all these questions. Pushing myself constantly to do better, because I just wanted to be on that same level. And it's like, nothing I did would get me there.
The moment she realized that there was actually a correlation between the experiences she was making and the color of her skin was when Little Mix gave a concert in Brazil in March 2020, and the fans, who were mostly black, screamed her name.
So we landed, and from that moment it was Leigh-Anne, Leigh-Anne.
This was an incredible experience for her. As Leigh-Anne put it herself, she never felt so accepted before.
Probably the fans in Europe unconsciously prefer the other white girls, as the European fan base in pop industry is predominantly white. But when Leigh-Anne saw that in other parts of the world she was supported way more, she finally knew that what she had been experiencing was real and that she did not make it all up.
In another scene of the documentary, Leigh-Anne looks back at the beginnings of her career when she suddenly had to change her whole appearance. After Little Mix won the X Factor, she had to shave off the side of her hair and dye it red by the order of her manager. This is what she called herself the Rihanna look.
I don't know if it's just me, but I think this hairstyle looks very stereotypical. If you compare her and Rihanna, it almost seems as if all black artists are presented and marketed in the same way by the music industry.
But you know what I find shocking? that even when she was staged as black, she was shown with straight and dyed hair, and that's not exactly typically black either.
Do you mean that this kind of black was also shaped by white beauty standards?
Yes, exactly. It seems like she had to adopt her look to the white beauty standards to be accepted. It's kind of as if they tried to make another version of the white girl, just a bit different.
But I actually feel like this is one of two possible marketing strategies almost. I mean, either labels try to make the artist a whitewashed version of a black person, which the white fans can identify with, or they exploit this entire idea of being black and push them into typically black stereotypes. For instance, they showed one clip of a music video in which Leigh-Anne wore hip-hop clothes and had her natural hair, which she never got to show usually.
Leigh-Anne herself says that she was a bit naive back then and let everything happen to her. In retrospect, the interventions of the label in the beginning seem strange to her now. As we already talked about earlier, that's something you don't question in the situation.
Leigh-Anne wanted to know if she's the only artist experiencing that and how she can make good use of her social range. For this purpose, she invites other black female musicians to talk about their experiences in the music industry and how racism influenced their careers. The other female artists are Keisha from the Sugar Babes, Alexandra Burke, R&B soul artist Now, and singer Ray. This is a very important day for Leigh-Anne because she realizes her story is not a singular case.
All of her guests published YouTube videos in which they criticize the music industry and how they have been treated. For example, Keisha from the Sugar Babes states that in the beginning of her career she was not accepted in a band since they already had a black girl and the management said that there could not be a second one.
This shows that your success in the music industry is not just a question of your talent, but of external circumstances very significantly.
And moreover, it shows that racism is an issue in all income classes. No matter how successful or wealthy you are, your race can still be an obstacle.
Yeah, right. But I think what Thomas just said is actually a real problem. I mean, on one side, you have to fit into the public's expectations and ideas, but on the other side, you want to be your own person, of course, and show your personality. Being dependent on the fans, though, musicians have to adopt.
And that just includes Western beauty standards as well?
Probably. Look, from an economical perspective, the world is full of standards and opinions about how you should be. As a musician, you are dependent on these people, your fans. So you have to make their beauty ideals yours. And in today's society, many have internalized the idea that if you are whiter, you are more beautiful. That's simply the beauty standard. It gets conveyed in all kinds of ways. Again, often subtle ones. Those are, for example, ads and campaigns. Just have a look around. How many black musicians or models are there? Not many.
I mean, I guess you're right, but that means that not them, but the public plays a huge role in the misconduct of the music industry branch, right?
Generally, I realize that the community is far more present in this problem than one might expect. You've heard of white passing, right?
Yes.
Would you explain it?
It is the experience that if people of color are perceived as white, they just go with it, neither denying nor correcting it because of the advantages that come with being white.
Yes, in the documentary, Leigh-Anne meets with friends and colleagues to talk about how to fight against racism. Her friend, the singer and songwriter Ray, experienced what you are describing.
You are in a as white as it gets environment. Because I visually don't look black, I can hide it. And I've been hiding it subconsciously.
Oh, that's rough. It is not just that somebody has made a mistake, it points out a big chunk of the problem. Your identity is shaped by society. You have to constantly fight back in order to retain your personality.
That's horrible. I mean, just imagine somebody identifies you with something positive. That's how white skin color is connotated, after all. And you're supposed to say, no, I'm not that. I'm different from what you think.
But then you just question, what if the situation was different? I mean, if they understood that you are black, would they behave differently?
What if Leigh-Anne's skin color was darker? Would she be less successful?
But the only safe answer is maybe. Nobody knows what would have happened if the initial situation had been different. That's what self-doubts are. You can't find answers to these questions.
I think what makes these self-doubts even worse is how Leigh-Anne always feels as if she, as a well-known black person, is representing her entire ethnicity.
Right. Just because you're the only black musician on stage, you stand there for your whole race. That's just wrong.
Yeah, but for the audience, that's how it works often. I mean, they just don't know many other black musicians.
So they just judge on their very limited experience, ignoring the fact that they are generalizing?
This is a problem for the musicians and, in fact, all people of color. Since they are underrepresented, every mistake that, for example, Leigh-Anne makes is projected onto her entire ethnicity. This puts her under extreme pressure.
Leigh-Anne actually talks about that experience. The day she recorded her first music video, the choreographer, who was also black, told her that she would have to work way harder than the others.
And he just turned to me and he just said, "You're the black girl, you're gonna have to work 10 times harder."
I just realized that her coach just accepts racism. As part of the business, he just tells her, racism is an issue, you can't defeat it, deal with it. I feel like this really shows how little hope and motivation for change there is, since it's so hard to fight.
And the main reason why it's so hard to defeat is, of course, that it has so many dimensions to it.
Right, what I used to be rather unaware of is colorism. Once again, would somebody explain it before we start talking about it?
Colorism is the discrimination against darker-skinned people within the same ethnic group. As we discussed before, the whiter you are, the easier it is for you to be successful. But not only is there colorism practiced by white power structures like courts, schools and businesses, moreover, colorism exists within the black community.
Leigh-Anne's fiancé, Andre, posted tweets 8 years ago saying things like, "Black girls with red lipsticks is like burnt toast with jam on it." That is a good example of colorism. When she confronts him about them, he says,
"You do become a product of your environment. So whatever you are around every day and you're not educated on it or exposed to why it's wrong or whatever, then it kind of sticks. People don't want to be dark-skinned in Jamaica a lot of the time. There's a lot of bleaching and whatever going on, and it's not cool to be, it's cool to be lighter.
The problem is that we all unconsciously think like that. It's very internalized.
I think Leigh-Anne is completely right. We need to think differently, to really question our bias.
But it's not an individual problem. Once again, I think it becomes clear here that this is actually a structural problem.
as Leigh-Anne herself is light-skinned, she is partly privileged and not as badly affected by colorism as darker-skinned people. Therefore, she got a lot of criticism from the black community for making this film.
They also showed a few tweets she got, saying things like,
"Getting a light-skinned girl to do that is colorism," or "Why they're letting a light-skinned person do that? It makes no sense."
These comments really hurt her, and she started questioning whether she is the right person to do this documentary.
And the same way she questioned herself, I actually have to admit that I did too. When she said in the beginning that she had barely made any experiences with racism and everything, I started to think just that. But the next moment I realized how absurd that is. I mean, how qualified are we to talk about this? Us four white people from the upper middle class judging whether she, a black woman, is qualified to talk about racism. I mean, isn't the important thing eventually that it is talked about?
Yeah, of course it makes sense for people who have experienced it to be the ones talking about it.
Which also qualifies her to make this documentary. Her experiences are valid, even if there are others who have experienced worse things.
Definitely, yes. And I believe that we have to act as allies and listen to these people. Spread the word about how just relevant it is, today still. So I think that everyone should talk about it, but that you should know your place, right? If you're not affected by it yourself, don't act as if you are, but rather check your privilege and be attentive about your behavior. Don't tolerate racism when you see it.
Some people are scared to slip up and to say the wrong thing, and I think because like this is very new, isn't it? This is very sensitive, but I'm so sick of people seeing it as, ooh, can't say that, better not say that. Like, come on, let's just do it.
Unfortunately, Leigh-Anne often had to experience that people did not want to comment on the topic and answer her questions. The biggest disappointment was in connection with her label, Sony Music. It wasn't enough for her to address the problems within her own team. She wanted to reach out to the head of Sony. Instead of the management of Sony talking to her, they sent ahead a black marketing director who was never relevant to her before. This made Leigh-Anne feel like her situation was not adequately discussed and taken seriously.
I can understand her disappointment, but on the other hand, I can also understand that no one from the label wanted to expose themselves publicly and take responsibility for it.
But I mean, that's another part of the issue. Racism is treated like a taboo subject, and no one talks about it out of fear of saying something wrong.
Leigh-Anne's label should have seen it as a chance to change something and to support her, instead of keeping quiet like all the years before.
I mean, I think we all agree that racism should not be a taboo subject in any case.
Oh yes. Remember when even Leigh-Anne's own father told her just accept it because nothing could be done about it?
I thought it was shocking.
Me too, but this is the first step we can take. We must not keep quiet about it. We must address the issue, thereby create a dialogue and raise awareness about it.
I mean, it always sounds so easy when you say it like this, of course.
Not be quiet about it is extremely vague, so what can we really do?
Remember how all of a sudden during the Black Lives Matter protests, everyone posted a black picture? All of Instagram was full of it. There you have seen the effect of social media.
Yes, but people should also be educated about what they represent, since many just go along with it because the mainstream does.
Please internalize this after listening to this podcast. It's very important. Don't share anything you don't understand. Educate yourself first.
That's what Leigh-Anne also does in the documentary. Although she is affected, she first informs herself properly and gains a much deeper understanding of the topic. She then even passes parts of this education on to her fans, partly through this documentary, of course, which I find very good.
With this, she also wants to call on her fans to become active and not just get into action when it's trendy.
Yes, I think education is the key to this whole issue. We just asked ourselves how qualified we are, and in a way, I feel we don't know enough about racism to give a bigger picture like Leigh-Anne does.
Yeah, but we know enough to know that everyone has to act. It's not hopeless.
Leigh-Anne said the world is waking up and we're determined to be a part of it. And I think she hit the nail on the head. The recent events have shown that awareness is spreading and that some structures are finally starting to dissolve.
These are really good approaches, but still, much more needs to be done.
For you sitting at home and listening to this, what do you need to take away from this podcast?
Racism is a deeply rooted structural problem. It does not only have one dimension but can occur anywhere and nobody is really safe from it. Neither from experiencing it nor maybe expressing it. Even if it is only subconsciously, it shows itself in forms of colorism, white passing, whitewashing. Because many of us don't even recognize it in their daily life, it's so hard to effectively fight it. This makes it even more important to act.
In terms of helping, use your opportunities. Of course, not everyone has the money and impact to start a foundation like Leigh-Anne did, but that doesn't mean anything. If your possibilities are limited, you can always educate yourself, educate others, and raise awareness. Be aware and never tolerate racism when you notice it. Thank you for staying with us this episode. I hope you took something away from it, and I hope that you educate yourself, educate others. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.